So this is the self-development with tactics book. So today we're going to talk about Tim Ferriss and what he's thinking about Stoicism, and just quite in particular Tim Ferriss on cultivating resilience, favorite Stoic practices, and how to shun comfort, which is very interesting, or which sounds very, very interesting. But something that I have to do is I have to just get something to block some noise, because I know that the audio is pretty shit if I don't have something acting like a pop filter. Yeah. So this is also and I'm just gonna read. It's basically an interview from the dailystoic.com site. The link is as always gonna be down in the description. So if you wanna check it out, please check it out. And I'm also gonna make it a little bit bigger because I can't see anything. So yeah, best-selling author and investor Tim Ferriss has been one of the most vocal modern proponents of Stoicism. For years, he was advocated the value of the philosophy. He has advocated, whether it is on his widely popular blog, which is read by millions, on his podcast, which at this point has over 200 million downloads, or on the stage of TED. He is currently in the middle of a book launch with Tribe of Mentors, which also has numerous references to Stoicism. And we were curious to know how Stoic practices were helping him remain sane in such stressful times. Tim was very generous with his time, and we also got to ask him for the best Stoic practices to cultivate resilience, his daily rituals, how he first discovered the philosophy, and much more. Oh, and pay attention to the full interview as he prescribes an important homework assignment for the daily Stoic community. Note that the below interview is transcribed from recorded conversation, so the tone is very conversational. Yeah, so just don't expect some high level literature there, I would say. You have been one of the most vocal modern proponents of Stoicism, from your blog to podcast to stage of TED. In fact, it has been close to a decade now, and you have introduced millions of people to the subject. So thank you for that. Now we would love to know how you first encountered the philosophy and why did it resonate in such a profound way. The answer. First encountered Stoicism in 2004 or so, and at the time I was completely flamed out. I was trapped in a monster of my own making, my business at the time. I was using stimulants to wake up and get going, using depressants to wind down and go to sleep. It was a very difficult time. I wasn't sure of how to scale my business without adding more hours to my day. So typically, I would wake up extraordinarily early to work on, say, Europe and other countries, and then go through the entire US, time zone by time zone, until I was working with Hawaii later at night. And then Japan and so on. It was completely unsustainable. I was looking for a way to simplify, to streamline everything in my personal business life, and came across a book of quotes. One of the quotes was from Seneca, and it was, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." There were several other quotes that popped up attributed to Seneca, which I'm embarrassed to admit at the time I thought was a Native American elder. Of course, I've since learned he was not a Native American elder, but in fact, we now think, rather portly man in Rome. That quote really sent me on a path to then finding the moral letters to Lucilius, which led me to other Stoic thinkers, including Marcus Aurelius, and so on and so forth. It resonated with me on several levels. Number one, it was secular. Number two, it was highly specific and tactical and designed to work in the real world. In other words, it was an abstraction in an ivory tower being resurgerated or something by philosophy professors in black turtlenecks, although those may also exist for Stoicism. It was an operating system that had been tested on the front lines, both literally in the case of, say, Marcus Aurelius, and metaphorically in other high-stake environments like the Senate, and certainly in POW camps and so on later. To a certain degree, it appealed to me because it was for me a Japanophile, someone who had his first trip abroad as an exchange student in Japan at age 15 for a year. It was very reminiscent of many Japanese philosophies that I've been exposed to, both in different facets of Bushido, pretty interesting, and martial arts philosophies, specifically the principles of Kano Jigoro, the founder of Judo, and I should say the most famous Japanese swordsman in history. Musashi Miyamoto, who wrote the Book of Five Rings, among other books, which is, as far as I know, a very known one. Last but not least, Stoicism can help you to become a better, kinder person, and helping you to become less emotionally reactive, e.g. reflexively angry or annoyed. It helps you to be better, to better resolve conflict and teach others to do the same. In my experience, particularly when combined with Buddhist metta or loving kindness meditation, Stoicism can foster greater compassion and also empathy. Both Stoicism and Buddhism focus quite extensively on awareness of impermanence, so the practices are often complementary. Overall, I would say that I view Stoicism not only as a means for greater effectiveness, which it certainly is, but also as a tool for creating a better, less device world. To quote Tim Ferriss, PhD, "No society in human history ever suffered because its people became too reasonable." And I do want to repeat it again. No society in human history ever suffered because its people became too reasonable. And there's a point that is sometimes missed. If you want to improve the world, you need to start with yourself. Even if you only care about service to others, altruism, or being an instrument for good to have the desired impact, you cannot be ruled by knee-jerk emotions, crying over spilled milk, and so on. If you want to save the planet, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first. Which is definitely the fucking case. Also regarding being a good person to other people. Like if you are just a shitty person, it's pretty hard to help other people if you yourself are a shitty person and imperfect, which is always going to be the case. But there's a lot of things we all can and also maybe should work on. You are in the middle of a book launch now with Tribe of Mentors, and those are always hectic and stressful. How does Stoicism help during such periods? There are a few very specific ways that Stoicism practices help on a daily basis. They are all very practical. The first is with, for instance, media and interviews of all different types. If you become excessively nervous or emotionally reactive, you've lost before you've even begun. For instance, if you're preparing for a national television show like Dr. Oz or an interview for NPR or whatever it might be, if you let your nerves get the better of you, it can cause you to freeze and you lose the opportunity. Rehearsing the worst case scenarios or negative visualization is a very powerful tool, which paradoxically allows you to become more relaxed and therefore more response able. For example, able to choose your response if you get thrown a curveball question or if you flub and make a mistake in the middle of a live broadcast, both of which have happened to me many, many times. You're able to recover faster because you don't go into a tailspin. That type of negative visualization is very important and I do constantly. Negative visualization means that you visualize the most negative outcome a certain situation or certain thing can have, as far as I remember. Second, I would say that simply reading Stoic passages in preparation for the day helps me to ideally ignore, and when I cannot ignore, not respond to, certainly not engage with critics who have unfounded attacks. Let's say. On the flip side, it also helps me to not believe my own press releases and hype, which can cause equally bad problems if I start to believe every word that the superfans say to me. I was given some very good advice around 2007, which was, you're never as bad as they say you are, but you're also never as good as they say you are either. Those are a few ways that immediately come to my mind that I'm applying, for instance, this week, the following week, when the demands on me are very high. The stakes are very high. I have both red-hot supporters and vehement, aggressive detractors, and I'm in public-facing environments. Stoicism for me is the perfect portfolio of principles and techniques for navigating that type of experience. But I would also say, just on a daily basis, as he also pointed out, it is just a very good philosophy to live by, I would say. There's a lot of very, as he as well said, practical things, and a lot of things that I just would say, like, yes, they indeed work and they make sense, and it's not just talk and it's just not bullshit and stuff. So yeah, I could totally also recommend it, I would say. So what are the 1, 2, 3 Stoic tactical pieces of advice you would recommend to our readers who want to cultivate resilience? There are a few pieces of advice that I would recommend, but more than advice, there are practices that I would recommend. The first would be practicing poverty or other types of worst-case scenarios. This comes directly from one of the moral letters to Lucilius, which is letter 18 apparently, on festivals and fasting, which I refer to all the time. This letter stuck out to me because of one paragraph that I think of all the time, and it is the following. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared? And you're probably going to notice, no, it's actually not that bad. Of course, it's not that nice either, but it is not that bad. That is what I repeat to myself over and over again. Back to Seneca. And another quote, it's precisely in times of immunity from care that the soul should toughen itself beforehand for occasions of greater stress, and it is, while fortune is kind, that it should fortify itself against her violence. In days of peace, the soldier performs maneuvers, throws up earthworks with no enemy in sight, and wearies himself by gratuitous toil in order that he may be equal to unavoidable toil. This is very important to me and immediately applicable to real life. For instance, I will regularly, 3 continuous days per month minimum, practice fasting. I will do that from early Thursday dinner to an early Sunday dinner to simply expose myself to the rather often unfamiliar sensation of real hunger. If I wanted to extend that, as one of my friends has done, a very successful CEO and author, he will schedule periods of time each quarter, say for a week, when he will effectively camp out in his living room, in a sleeping bag, and he will survive on cheap instant coffee and instant oatmeal, perhaps at cost of $15 per week maximum. This is so that he's better able to make decisions and that are proactive and big picture, and less out of obligation or guilt or fear of missing out, because he knows that even if he misses a particular deal, even if a cutting edge project or experiment or his pushing the envelope fails, that he can make do, and in fact often thrive with next to nothing. Indeed, perhaps unexpectedly at the end of such experiment, people will very often be in a better mental state, feel more content than they did beforehand. It is very freeing. Practicing poverty or practicing rehearsing your worst case scenario in real life, not just journaling, not just in your head, I find very, very important. Certainly, I expose myself to a lot of duress and pain in say the form of ice baths and cold exposure, simply develop my tolerance for the then unavoidable pain and disruption that comes to all of us. The more you schedule and practice discomfort deliberately, the less unplanned discomfort will throw off your life and control your life. The second exercise is perhaps the most important exercise that I do for myself. It's completely borrowed from Stoicism, just adapted into a written exercise that I do called fear setting. I won't go through the entire thing here because it would take too long, but the easiest place to find all instructions for that for free is tim.blog/TED, because he actually did a TED talk exactly on that, which is very interesting. And why can't I'm gonna wait. The last exercise or category of exercise that I would recommend are comfort challenges. I do want to go through the fear setting a little bit. I don't remember it that much, and I'm very sorry for that. But it is more or less about just really also visualizing your fears as I remember, or as far as I remember. Well, maybe when I'm having the time afterwards, I'm going to go through it. The last exercise or category of exercise that I would recommend are comfort challenges. These are simple exercises that you can do on a regular basis to expand your comfortable sphere of action. I've heard it said before. I certainly didn't come up with the expression, everything you want is just outside your comfort zone. Why don't you proactively develop an ability to widen that comfort zone? These are some very simple ways to do that. For instance, you can go into various places like a Starbucks and practice doing the lay down challenge. This is laying down on the floor without saying anything to anyone, not telling them you're doing an exercise. Lay down on the floor for 10 seconds. If they ask if you're all right, you say, yes, I am totally fine. And then you get back up like nothing happened and continue on with waiting, in line or whatever you were doing. The downside is very minimal. Of course, don't do this in traffic. Use some common sense. Don't do it anywhere people are going to trip over you, but in a place where you can expose yourself to potential embarrassment and also shame, which is the point of the whole exercise. And it is still not working. This is very along the lines of what Cato used to do with wearing tunics of unpopular colors and walking barefoot. He was training himself to be ashamed of only those things truly worth being ashamed of, and you can do the same. Another option would be doing what my friend Noah Kagan calls the coffee challenge. Going into a type of coffee shop. If you don't like coffee, I could It could be tea, it could be water, it doesn't matter. When you go to the end of the line and you're placing your order, you ask for 10% off. Again, you don't tell them you're doing an exercise. You don't tell them Tim Ferriss said you or Seneca made you do it. You just have to bite your lip and bear it. The entire point is to risk rejection and discomfort by asking for 10% off. Your coffee is a second example of many examples in this category of comfort challenges. I would suggest slating at least one per week for yourself. Yeah. How long is it? I'm going to be able to finish. What are some of the weaknesses that you see in Stoicism? Which, by the way, is a very interesting one because we're often just talking about Stoicism in a very positive way and a lot of good ways, but there's always downsides to quite everything. And this is something that we should all keep in mind and we all should look for. So yeah. This is a tough one for me to answer because I think Stoicism is fairly comprehensive. I would say that after reading thousands of letters and chapters and journal entries related to Stoicism, there are times when I feel it can lead someone to be someone overly dour or Spock-like. For me, I found that while Stoicism helps me to be very non-reactive and to accomplish and achieve more with less wasted energy, I do like to add a healthy dose of Epicureanism and wine and enjoy my wine and gardening, for instance. There is a place, at least in my life, for a decent amount of hedonism. I don't think they need to be mutually exclusive. Certainly, if you were to look at the reported lives, not necessarily self-described lives, of some of our favorite Stoics, there's certainly a fair amount of debauchery involved. Whatever this means, I don't know, but I'm gonna search it. Ausschweifung, dissipation, dissoluteness, degeneracy, corruption, vice. Yeah. I know we all make mistakes and we all are not perfect. Which Stoic quote do you remind yourself of today the most often? Which Stoic quote do you remind yourself of the most often in your day-to-day life? I would have to be the one that introduced me to Stoicism. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, from Seneca. A close cousin of that which I may be getting somewhat wrong is, he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than it is necessary. Which is as well by Seneca, and it is a really good one, and I'm thankful that I'm reading this again because I've lost it. Because this is actually one of the best quotes that I've ever heard in my entire life, but I've forgotten about it, unfortunately, so I know it again. I really think that the imagined arguments, the past arguments, the imagined fights, in the future, the past fights that we don't need to hold on to really cause the vast majority of the pain we experience, not the events that come to pass. Those would be two that come to mind. Certainly the letter 18 that I mentioned, there are several passages in that letter that I think of very, very often. And there's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, which I have taped to my refrigerator so that I'll see it on a very regular basis from Meditations, and it reads as follows. When jarred unavoidably by circumstance, revert at once to yourself and don't lose the rhythm more than you help. You will have a better grasp of the harmony if you keep going back to it. When jarred unavoidably by circumstance, revert at once to yourself and don't lose the rhythm. I don't actually get it. This quote pairs very well with what I typically do before I go to the refrigerator in the morning, which is 20 to 22 minutes of meditation, seated meditation of some types, very often transcendental meditation or vipassana meditation, where I am observing my breathing, I'm observing my psychological state, tightness, and so on, which pairs very nicely with revert at once to yourself. And therefore, when I'm combining these two on a daily basis, if I end up getting cut off in traffic or I end up getting cut off in a conversation by someone, I'm able to revert to myself. For example, pay attention to my breath or how I'm feeling for even a millisecond so that I'm less likely to reflexively get upset and more likely to pause for a very short period and then respond in a more constructive way so that I'm focused on, for instance, not being right, but getting the outcome that I want. Those are a few that comes to mind right off the bat. The Daily Stoic community has now grown to thousands and thousands of readers. So what would be a Stoic homework assignment that you want to give them, bet it for today, this week, or month? It's completely up to you. Whether it is a text to read, a Stoic practice, a question to journal, on etc. Yeah, as I've seen over the last 10 years of reading Stoicism and certainly observing hundreds of thousands of readers digesting Stoicism, the wisdom from many both ancient and modern or contemporary practitioners of Stoicism often fails in the last mile. That is the translation from book to page to action. I would like to prescribe something seemingly very mundane, and that is their coffee challenge. For the next week, for instance, every time you get a coffee, ask for 10% off, or you can lay down and do the lay down challenge. Every single time you get coffee or tea or buy something at retail, I should say not every single time, but once per day, ask for 10% off. If you're saying to yourself, I negotiate huge deals, that's part of my job, that's ridiculous, I don't need it, I've heard this before. You actually may find it more difficult than you expect, and that is the whole point. It is not enough to plan for discomfort, it is enough to rehearse in your mind that you're going to do when faced with discomfort. You have to practice it. And I will close with another quote, which I can say is from a Stoic, but it's from another oldie but goodie, Archilochus, which I actually don't know, whom I don't know. And it is, quote unquote, "We do not rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training." Don't play in your head, get in the messy realities of the real world and put Stoicism to work. And I do actually want to end the episode there. There's not too much to add, and I do not want to add anything. So I wish you the best health, wealth, happiness, and also success, and also hope that you're going to remind yourself and you're going to be remembered, which basically means your legacy, and basically means just being a nice person and then also being remembered as a nice person, which is a pretty fucking cool thing. 3 other questions that I have for you are: why are you here? What are you trying to change, and what's bothering you the most? These 3 questions hopefully going to show you a purpose and maybe even a business idea. One last question that I have for you is: what could you particularly say that is really going to change somebody's life? Because I totally believe that we all can say something, that we all can spit something, that we all can spread something in words that is really going to change how somebody feels about the world and feels about themselves, which is an amazing thing. So I'm going to see you the next time. Bye, and thank you very tremendously much from the bottom of my heart. Bye.